The first thing Lori did when she arrived in Seoul was accidentally threaten a foreman with a lawsuit she hadn't yet filed, lose her favorite gold earring in a drainage grate at the Incheon arrivals gate, and spend 40 minutes convincing a customs officer that her architectural drafting kit was not, in fact, a collection of high-tech spy equipment. She considered this a highly efficient start. Lori had landed in Korea on a prestigious 3-year lead contract for the Han River redevelopment project, a massive undertaking that promised to rewrite the skyline of the city. She was 32, impeccably tailored, unapologetically ambitious, and had shipped an entire crate of specialty blueprint paper and vintage drafting pens because she refused to design the future of Seoul with anything less than perfection. Her father had called her cold. Her colleagues in Chicago had called her a steamroller. Her ex-fiancé had told her she'd be home before the first foundation was poured, and that sentence alone was why she had signed the contract in ink that cost more than his car. Seoul received her like a challenge that didn't know it was about to be met. She lived in a sleek, glass-walled loft in Gangnam, decorated with floor-to-ceiling blueprints of buildings that didn't exist yet, a collection of expensive scotch she only touched after a successful pitch, and a framed note on her desk that simply read, "If they don't give you a seat, build a new table." She drank bitter black coffee when she was focused and expensive tea at 2:00 a.m. when the scale of the Kang family's influence kept her awake. She had already memorized the shortcuts through the city's back alleys because she hated being late, and she was already a regular at a small dumpling shop where the owner called her the Queen of Concrete because of her posture. Life was precise, sharp, demanding, and exactly how she liked it. Until she stepped onto the Kang estate and realized that some structures weren't built of stone, but of secrets. The air in the Kang estate smelled of cedar and damp earth, a sharp departure from the sterile, metallic scent of the Gangnam construction sites Lori had spent 12 hours packing. She was exhausted, her heels were punishing her, and thanks to a GPS glitch and a very confusing set of stone corridors, she was officially trespassing. She rounded a corner of weathered wood and found herself in a hanok courtyard so silent it felt like a pocket of frozen time. At the center sat a man. He was framed by the amber glow of a single paper lantern, his silhouette sharp against the dark eaves of the traditional house. He was seated in a wheelchair, titanium and leather, expensive and cold, staring down at a marble chessboard with the intensity of a sniper. Lori didn't back away. She didn't offer a polite cough of apology. Instead, she adjusted her leather drafting tube, stepped onto the mossy stones, and looked at the board. "Knight to F6, she asked, her voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "You're playing like a man who's already lost." The man didn't flinch. He slowly tilted his head back, revealing a jawline that looked like it had been carved from the same marble as the chess pieces. His eyes were dark, guarded, and entirely unimpressed. "I am playing the odds," he replied. His English was perfect, clipped and heavy with the weight of a high-priced British education. "The odds are for people who can't afford to take a risk," Lori countered, stepping fully into the lantern light. She dropped her bag on the stone bench opposite him and sat down without an invitation. "I'm Lori, and I don't believe in losing by increments. Reset the board. Let's see if your hands are as stagnant as your strategy." Terrell stared at her, a flicker of something, not quite a smile but a spark of dormant fire, lighting his eyes. He hadn't been challenged in years. He had only been pitied. "You have no idea where you are, do you?" he asked quietly. "In a garden, opposite a bored man," she shrugged, reaching for a white pawn. "The rest is just architecture." The next morning, Lori's glass-walled office in Gangnam felt less like a sanctuary and more like a surveillance hub. After 3 hours of digging through digitized land registries and off-the-record architectural archives, the pieces clicked into place with a sickening metallic snap. The man in the garden wasn't just a bored aristocrat. He was C.O. Terrell, the ghost of the Kang Syndicate. 5 years ago, he had been the golden strategist, the Ivy-educated mind behind the family's transition from back-alley enforcers to corporate titans. Then came the accident, a high-speed collision on the Olympic Bridge that the police reports called a malfunction and the streets called a hit. Lori leaned back, tapping a vintage drafting pen against her chin. Her redevelopment project, the crown jewel of her career, didn't just border Kang territory, it sat directly on top of the family's primary money-laundering arteries. She returned to the estate that evening, bypassing the main house. Terrell was exactly where she'd left him, draped in a charcoal cashmere coat that looked like a shroud. "My father doesn't like visitors," he said without turning around, "especially ones who carry subpoenas in their eyes." "I'm not here as a process server," Lori said, stepping into his line of sight. She spread a blueprint across the marble chess table, pinning it down with a black stone. "I'm here because I'm building a bridge through a minefield. Your brother wants to bury this project. Your father wants to pretend you're a tax write-off." Terrell's jaw tightened. The word write-off hit harder than any physical blow. "I need a consultant," Lori continued, her voice dropping to a low, steady hum. "Someone who knows every secret door in the city. You act as my tactical lead on local interference, and in return, I give you a seat at a table they can't kick you away from. I'm giving you a reason to leave this room, Terrell. Take it or stay a ghost." For a long minute, the only sound was the wind. Then, Terrell reached out, his fingers tracing the outline of her blueprint. "The foundation is flawed," he whispered, looking up. "Let me show you where the bodies are buried." The next morning, Lori's glass-walled office in Gangnam felt less like a sanctuary and more like a surveillance hub. After 3 hours of digging through digitized land registries and off-the-record architectural archives, the pieces clicked into place with a sickening metallic snap. The man in the garden wasn't just a bored aristocrat. He was C.O. Terrell, the ghost of the Kang Syndicate. 5 years ago, he had been the golden strategist, the Ivy-educated mind behind the family's transition from back-alley enforcers to corporate titans. Then came the accident, a high-speed collision on the Olympic Bridge that the police reports called a malfunction and the streets called a hit. Lori leaned back, tapping a vintage drafting pen against her chin. Her redevelopment project, the crown jewel of her career, didn't just border Kang territory, it sat directly on top of the family's primary money-laundering arteries. She returned to the estate that evening, bypassing the main house. Terrell was exactly where she'd left him, draped in a charcoal cashmere coat that looked like a shroud. "My father doesn't like visitors," he said without turning around, "especially ones who carry subpoenas in their eyes." "I'm not here as a process server," Lori said, stepping into his line of sight. She spread a blueprint across the marble chess table, pinning it down with a black stone. "I'm here because I'm building a bridge through a minefield. Your brother wants to bury this project. Your father wants to pretend you're a tax write-off." Terrell's jaw tightened. The word write-off hit harder than any physical blow. "I need a consultant," Lori continued, her voice dropping to a low, steady hum. "Someone who knows every secret door in the city. You act as my tactical lead on local interference, and in return, I give you a seat at a table they can't kick you away from. I'm giving you a reason to leave this room, Terrell. Take it or stay a ghost." For a long minute, the only sound was the wind. Then, Terrell reached out, his fingers tracing the outline of her blueprint. "The foundation is flawed," he whispered, looking up. "Let me show you where the bodies are buried." The mud of the Han River site was a brutal gray sludge that swallowed boots and defied high-tech drainage, but Lori didn't flinch. She strode across the steel girders in high-visibility orange, her voice carrying over the roar of the excavators. Behind her, Terrell moved with a quiet, motorized hum, his wheelchair fitted with heavy-duty tires Lori had insisted he buy. Officially, he was her accessibility consultant. Unofficially, he was her shadow. "The district subcommittee is sitting on the permit for the Eastern Pier," Lori shouted over a pneumatic drill, wiping grit from her forehead. "They're claiming the soil density reports are inconclusive. It's a stall tactic, Terrell. My brother-in-law in Chicago used it to kill a stadium project in 14. Terrell scanned the site, his eyes tracking the movement of the cranes with a predatory precision. He wasn't looking at the concrete, he was looking at the logistics. "It's not the soil," Terrell said, his voice low and steady through the comm set in Lori's ear. The chairman of that subcommittee, Mr. Park, has a nephew who owns the gravel quarry 3 kilometers north. You didn't contract with him. You went with the supplier from Incheon. Lori stopped walking, turning to look at him. You know this for a fact. I know the ledger of every bribe paid in this district since I was 20, Terrell replied. He pulled a tablet from his lap, his fingers flying across the screen. Don't fight the permit. Invite Mr. Park to a safety gala next week. Mention the Incheon supplier is under investigation for a minor and entirely fictional clerical error. He'll approve the permit by sunset to protect his nephew from the association. Lori stared at him, a slow, triumphant grin spreading across her face. You're a terrifying human being, Terrell. I was a Kang strategist, he reminded her, his chest expanding with a pride he hadn't felt in half a decade. I am simply applying the architecture of the underworld to your skyline. The Gangnam skyline was a sea of electric violet and cold white, bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling glass of Lori's loft. Inside, the only light came from the warm glow of a drafting lamp, casting long, architectural shadows across a sea of scattered blueprints. Terrell sat by the window, his reflection ghostly against the night. The high-performance tires of his chair were silent on the polished concrete. My father held a funeral for me the day I came home from the hospital, he said, his voice so thin it barely carried over the hum of the air conditioning. He didn't bury a body. He just stopped looking at me. In the syndicate, if you aren't an apex predator, you're a ghost. I became a line item in a ledger of losses. Lori paused, her vintage fountain pen hovering over a structural cross-section. She didn't offer the hollow comfort of a sorry. Instead, she set the pen down and walked over, leaning against the glass beside him. I spent my 20s being told I was a diversity hire or a pretty face for the marketing brochures, she said, looking out at the city she was currently reshaping. In Chicago, the old guard developers wouldn't even look me in the eye during site inspections. They'd talk to my white junior architects like I was the one who was invisible. She turned to him, her gaze as steady as a plumb line. I learned early on that people will try to build walls around you using your own skin or your own circumstances. But a foundation is only as strong as the person who pours it, Terrell. I poured mine in iron. I didn't wait for them to see me. I made it impossible for them to look away. Silence that followed was heavy, charged with the sudden, sharp realization of how much they mirrored one another. Terrell looked up at her, and for the first time he didn't feel like a strategic asset or a project to be managed. He felt the weight of her undivided attention, not on his chair, not on his tactical mind, but on the man underneath the armor. You see me, he whispered, the words more of a discovery than a question. Lori didn't blink. I've seen you since the garden, Terrell. I'm just waiting for you to catch up. The invitation was a thick, cream-colored card embossed with a gold dragon, sitting on the stone table like a taunt. Beside it lay a folded internal memo from Chairman Kang's office, the ink cold and final. C.O. Terrell is to remain at the estate. His presence is not conducive to the image of the new Kang leadership. When Lori entered the Hanok garden, the moon was a silver sliver reflecting in the dark water of the koi pond. Terrell was staring at the water, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles were white. They're holding the coronation at the Grand Hyatt, Terrell said, his voice devoid of its usual tactical edge. Hyunjin is being named the sole successor. My father sent this to ensure I don't embarrass the bloodline with my current configuration. Current configuration, Lori repeated, her voice sparking with a dangerous electricity. Is that what they're calling it now? She didn't offer a hug or a platitude. Instead, she stepped forward and dropped a heavy, high-gloss designer catalog onto his lap, the thud echoing in the silence. It was the lookbook for a premier Italian tailor known for dressing heads of state. What is this? Terrell asked, finally looking up. It's your armor, Lori said, her eyes flashing. Your father thinks he can edit you out of the family history like a clerical error. He wants a ghost because ghosts are easy to ignore. But he's forgotten one thing about ghosts, Terrell. She leaned down, her face inches from his, the scent of her perfume mixing with the midnight air. They're the only ones who can haunt a house until it falls down. We aren't asking for an invitation. We're crashing the gates. They want a ghost. Fine. We're going to give them a revolution. And by the time we're done, nobody will even remember Hyunjin's name. Terrell looked at the catalog, then back at the woman who refused to let him fade. For the first time, he didn't see the chair. He saw a throne. The air in Laurie's loft was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the sharp, ozonic static of adrenaline. On the mahogany dressing table, gold fixtures gleamed under the warm track lighting, but they were dull compared to the woman standing before the full-length mirror. Laurie was a vision of structural defiance. Her cobalt silk gown didn't just drape. It commanded the space, the deep blue hue a deliberate choice, the color of high-altitude skis and the deepest, most unreachable parts of the ocean. It was the color of authority. The high slit revealed a glimpse of a toned leg and a gold-strapped heel, and her afro was pinned back with architectural gold clips that caught the light like redirected sunbeams. She turned to Terrell. He sat in his chair, his custom black-on-black tuxedo fitted with such surgical precision that it looked like a second skin. He looked formidable, his shoulders broad and set, the darkness of the fabric making the sharp angles of his face look like obsidian. "Tie is crooked," Laurie whispered, stepping into his personal space. The silence between them wasn't the heavy, suffocating kind he had lived with for years. It was the quiet of a fuse burning toward a detonator. Laurie's fingers were steady as she reached out, her knuckles grazing the underside of his jaw as she adjusted the silk bow tie. Terrell's breath hitched, his dark eyes locked onto hers, tracing the gold flecks in her irises. "You look like a king, Terrell," she murmured, smoothing the lapels of his jacket. "And kings don't wait for an introduction, they create the room." Terrell reached up, his hand covering hers for a brief, searing second. The ghost was gone. In his place was a man who had finally stopped asking for permission to occupy his own skin. "Let's go haunt them, Laurie," he said. The double doors of the Grand Hyatt ballroom didn't just open, they surrendered. As the gold-leafed portals swung wide, the low hum of 300 elite guests bottomed out into a vacuum of stunned silence. The string quartet faltered, a violin screeching a discordant note before dying away. Laurie stepped into the light, a goddess in cobalt and gold. She didn't walk, she marched with the regal composure of a woman who owned the air she breathed. Beside her, Terrell moved with a predatory grace, his black-on-black tuxedo absorbing the shimmer of the crystal chandeliers. His hand was steady on the controls of his chair, his head held high, eyes fixed forward with the cold, tactical brilliance of the strategist they had tried to bury. The ghost had returned, and he brought the storm with him. Chairman Kang froze at the head table, his champagne flute hovering inches from his lips. Hyunjin's face drained of color, his coronation crumbling into a footnote the moment Terrell crossed the threshold. "Chairman Kang," Laurie's voice rang out, melodic yet lethal, carrying across the silent expanse. "I believe you know my lead consultant." Before the chairman could find his breath, the room shifted. It wasn't the Mafia who moved first, it was the money. Laurie's high-level investors, the titans of global infrastructure who had spent weeks marveling at the anonymous strategic genius behind her redevelopment bids, surged forward. "Terrell," Director Beck of the Hanseng Group called out, weaving through the stunned Kang enforcers to shake Terrell's hand. "That analysis on the Eastern Pier logistics, revolutionary. I had no idea you were back in the game." Circle tightened around them. Terrell didn't look at the floor. He looked at the men who had once dismissed him, engaging them with a sharp, unhurried authority that made the room bend to his gravity. Beside him, Laurie rested a hand lightly on his shoulder, not to support him, but to mark her territory. The shameful son was gone. In his place stood the most powerful man in the room, and the Kang family could only watch from the shadows as their own walls began to fall. The morning after the Blue Dragon Gala, the air at the Kang estate felt fundamentally different. It was no longer the heavy, stagnant air of a tomb. It was the crisp, electric atmosphere of a site where the old foundation had been cleared for something new. Hyunjin's attempt to strip Terrell's shares didn't just fail, it backfired. The board of directors, ever pragmatic, had seen the way the global investors gravitated toward Terrell. They didn't care about face. They cared about the fact that Terrell was the only Kang who could speak the language of the future. By noon, the legal documents meant to erase him had been replaced by a new mandate. Terrell was to oversee the entire legitimate wing of the syndicate's transition. Laurie found him on the high stone balcony of the traditional estate, overlooking the sprawl of Seoul. The city was a grid of glass and light, a blueprint he was finally allowed to touch. "My father hasn't spoken a word since we left the Hyatt," Terrell said, his voice quiet but devoid of the old hollow ache. He looked at the horizon, his hands resting relaxed on his lap. He doesn't know how to navigate a world where his shame is my greatest asset. Him learn, Lori said, stepping up beside him. She leaned her back against the railing, her silhouette sharp against the sky. The cobalt gown was gone, replaced by her signature tailored blazer, but the boss energy remained. Some structures are meant to be demolished, Terrell. Others just need a better architect. Terrell reached out, taking her hand. It wasn't a gesture of a man clinging to a savior, but of an equal claiming his partner. The traditional walls of the estate remained, but they no longer felt like a cage. "What's the first move, architect?" he asked, looking up at her with a smirk. Lori looked out at the skyline, her eyes already tracing the lines of the next skyscraper. "We build," she said. "And this time, we make sure the foundation is iron."